In the quiet corridors of Adelaide Cottage, where morning light filters through ancient windows, a love story was being rewritten. Not with grand gestures or royal proclamations, but, with the gentle squeeze of fingers intertwined during sleepless nights, with whispered conversations that stretched until dawn, and, with a courage that would inspire millions around the world. Catherine never imagined that the woman who once felt nervous about joining the royal family would become the same person who would face her greatest fear with such grace that it would strengthen not just her marriage, but touch the hearts of people everywhere. When she looked into William's eyes during those difficult months, she didn't see a future king worried about duty and protocol. She saw a man who was willing to put everything aside for the woman he loved, a husband who would redefine what it means to stand by someone through the darkest of times. This is not just a story about overcoming illness. This is about how two people discovered that true love isn't found in the perfect moments, but in the imperfect ones where you choose each other again and again. It's about how a health battle that could have broken them instead became the foundation for a love stronger than any crown, any tradition, and any expectation the world could place upon them. Some love stories are written in fairy tales. Others are written in hospital rooms, in quiet moments of fear and hope, and in the decision to face uncertainty together. This is one of those stories. The January morning started like any other at Adelaide Cottage. Catherine stirred her tea slowly, watching steam rise from the delicate china cup while William rustled through the morning papers at the kitchen table. Their 3 children were still asleep upstairs, and these precious quiet moments had become sacred in their busy lives. The soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway marked time in a way that felt both comforting and eternal. Catherine had always been the morning person in their relationship. While William preferred to ease into the day gradually, she found peace in these early hours when the world belonged only to them. Today felt different though, and she couldn't quite put her finger on why. There was a heaviness in her chest that she had been ignoring for weeks, dismissing it as stress from their packed royal schedule or perhaps the lingering effects of a busy Christmas season with extended family. "The children will be down soon," William said, glancing up from an article about economic policy. His voice carried that familiar warmth that had first drawn her to him all those years ago at university. Even now, after all this time, after 3 children and countless royal engagements, after growing into their roles as future king and queen consort, he could still make her feel like that 20-year-old girl who had fallen in love with a prince who just wanted to be treated like anyone else. Catherine nodded, taking another sip of her tea, but found herself distracted by a persistent thought that had been nagging at her for days. The fatigue she had been experiencing wasn't normal. She knew her body well after 3 pregnancies, after years of maintaining the demanding schedule that royal life required. This was different. There was an exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, a heaviness that rest couldn't lift. "Are you feeling all right?" William asked, his newspaper forgotten as he studied her face with the attention that comes from knowing someone intimately for over 2 decades. "You seem distant this morning." She wanted to brush off his concern, to maintain the composure that had become second nature in their public life. But, sitting here in their kitchen, with morning light streaming through windows that overlooked the garden where their children played every day, she found herself unable to pretend everything was normal. "I think I need to see Dr. Matthews," she said quietly, setting down her teacup with hands that trembled slightly. The admission felt enormous in the peaceful quiet of their home. William's attention sharpened immediately. He knew Catherine well enough to understand that she didn't make medical appointments lightly. She was the type of person who pushed through discomfort, who prioritized everyone else's needs before acknowledging her own. For her to voice concern about her health meant she had been worrying about it for longer than she was letting on. "What's been bothering you?" he asked, reaching across the small table to take her hand. His fingers were warm and familiar, calloused from years of polo and outdoor activities, but gentle in the way they had always been with her. Catherine took a deep breath, trying to organize thoughts that had been swirling in her mind for weeks. "I've been so tired, William." Not the kind of tired that comes from busy days or late nights with the children. It's deeper than that. And there have been some other things. She paused, struggling to voice concerns that felt both insignificant and terrifying at the same time. The kitchen clock chimed 7 times, a sound that usually signaled the beginning of their family's morning routine. Today it felt ominous, marking the moment when their lives began to shift in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. William squeezed her hand gently, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that had comforted her through everything from wedding nerves to the anxiety of becoming new parents. "We'll call Dr. Matthews today. Whatever it is, we'll handle it together." His certainty was both reassuring and frightening. Catherine had always been the one others turned to for strength and stability. She was the duchess who never seemed rattled by public scrutiny, who had gracefully navigated the complexities of royal life while raising 3 children and supporting countless charitable causes. The idea that she might need to lean on others, that she might not be able to maintain her usual role as everyone's source of support, felt overwhelming. The sound of small feet running down the hallway interrupted their quiet conversation. George, their eldest, appeared in the doorway with his hair sticking up at impossible angles and his school uniform only half on. At 10 years old, he had developed his father's habit of rushing through mornings and his mother's inability to let important things go unfinished. "Mummy, I can't find my geography project," he announced, oblivious to the serious conversation he had just interrupted. "It's due today and it was on my desk last night but now it's gone and I think Charlotte might have taken it because she was looking for colored pencils yesterday evening." Catherine smiled despite her worries, rising from her chair to help her son navigate his morning crisis. This was the reality of their life, the beautiful chaos of raising children who were both royal heirs and ordinary kids who lost homework and argued with their siblings. These moments grounded her, reminding her of what truly mattered beyond titles and duties. "Let's go look for it together," she said, ruffling George's unruly hair. "And we'll find Charlotte and Louis too. They'll need breakfast before school." As they headed toward the stairs, William caught her arm gently. "Catherine," he said quietly, "we're calling Dr. Matthews this morning. Promise me." She nodded, seeing the worry in his blue eyes that he was trying to hide from their children. "I promise." The next hour passed in the familiar whirlwind of getting 3 children ready for their day. Charlotte, now 8 and increasingly independent, had indeed borrowed George's colored pencils but insisted she hadn't touched his geography project. 5-year-old Louis was more interested in building elaborate structures with his breakfast cereal than actually eating it, requiring gentle but persistent encouragement to focus on nutrition rather than architecture. Catherine moved through these morning rituals with the practiced efficiency of a mother who had done this countless times, but William noticed the small signs that others might miss. She paused slightly at the bottom of the stairs before climbing them, took a moment longer than usual to catch her breath after chasing Louis around the kitchen table, and sat down heavily in her chair when she thought no one was looking. By the time they had successfully located George's project, convinced Charlotte to wear weather-appropriate clothes, and negotiated with Louis about the necessity of brushing teeth, Catherine felt the familiar exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. But, this time, William was watching, and she could see her own concerns reflected in his careful attention to her every movement. Their nanny, Maria, arrived precisely at 8 o'clock to help with the children's journey to school. Maria had been with the family since Louis was born, and her presence meant Catherine could step back from the morning chaos earlier than usual. Instead of relief, Catherine felt a pang of something she couldn't quite identify. Was she already beginning to withdraw from the daily responsibilities that had always given her life structure and purpose? After the children left for school, the house felt unnaturally quiet. Catherine and William found themselves back in the kitchen, their morning tea now cold, facing the conversation they had postponed while managing their family's needs. "I'll call the doctor's office," William said, already reaching for his phone. "They'll see you today if I ask them to." Catherine wanted to protest, to insist that it wasn't urgent enough to demand special treatment, but she found herself nodding instead. The worry she had been carrying alone for weeks felt lighter now that William was sharing the burden, even though she knew that involving him meant this was becoming real in a way she wasn't prepared for. Dr. Sarah Matthews had been the royal family's physician for over a decade, a woman whose competence was matched only by her ability to treat her royal patients as ordinary people dealing with extraordinary circumstances. Her office was located in a private clinic in London, a place where Catherine had brought her children for routine checkups and vaccinations, where the atmosphere was professional but warm. "She can see you at 2 o'clock this afternoon," William said after a brief phone conversation. "I'll drive you." "You don't need to cancel your schedule," Catherine began, but William's expression stopped her mid-sentence. "Catherine, my schedule doesn't matter. Nothing matters except making sure you're okay." His voice carried an intensity that reminded her of the man who had proposed to her in a remote cabin in Kenya, who had chosen love over the easier path of royal bachelorhood, who had always made it clear that she was his priority above all else. The hours between breakfast and their appointment stretched endlessly. Catherine tried to focus on correspondence, reviewing notes for upcoming charitable engagements and responding to invitations that required personal attention. But concentration eluded her, and she found herself reading the same sentences over and over without absorbing their meaning. William worked quietly in his study, but she could feel his attention on her even when they were in separate rooms. He brought her lunch without being asked, checked on her with excuses about needing her opinion on trivial matters, and suggested they leave for London earlier than necessary to avoid any possibility of being late. The drive to Dr. Matthews' office was unusually quiet for them. Normally, car rides were filled with conversation about their children, discussions of upcoming royal duties, or comfortable silence that came from years of understanding each other's moods. Today, the silence felt heavy with unspoken fears and possibilities neither of them wanted to voice. London traffic moved with its typical unpredictability, giving them too much time to think and worry. Catherine watched familiar landmarks pass by the window, noting how ordinary the world looked when her own world might be shifting in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. People walked on sidewalks, went about their daily business, lived their lives without knowing that in this private car, a future queen was grappling with fears that felt both intensely personal and impossibly large. "Whatever Dr. Matthews tells us, we'll handle it together," William said as they pulled into the clinic's private entrance. "You're not alone in this, Catherine. You'll never be alone in this." She turned to look at him, this man who had been her anchor for so many years, and saw her own fear reflected in his eyes along with a determination that reminded her why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. He wasn't just offering support, he was promising partnership in whatever lay ahead. "I know," she whispered, taking his hand as they prepared to walk into an appointment that would change everything. "I love you, William." "I love you too," he replied, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture that was both tender and fierce. "Always." As they walked toward Dr. Matthews' office together, Catherine felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her, but she also felt something else. Despite her fear, despite not knowing what lay ahead, she felt the absolute certainty that whatever challenges were coming, she wouldn't face them alone. In that moment, before they knew anything definitive, before their lives were redefined by medical terminology and treatment plans, she felt the deep security that comes from being truly loved and completely supported. The receptionist greeted them with practiced discretion, and, within minutes they were seated in Dr. Matthews' office, ready to begin a journey that would test everything they thought they knew about love, strength, and what it meant to face life's greatest challenges together. Dr. Matthews' office had always felt like a sanctuary to Catherine, with its soft lighting and carefully chosen artwork that managed to be both professional and comforting. Today, however, the familiar space felt charged with tension as she and William sat across from the doctor who had guided them through 3 pregnancies and countless minor health concerns over the years. Dr. Sarah Matthews was a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and directness that Catherine had always appreciated. She didn't believe in sugarcoating medical realities, but she delivered difficult news with a compassion that acknowledged the human being behind the patient. Today, her expression carried a gravity that made Catherine's stomach clench with anticipation. "The test results are back from your blood work and imaging," Dr. Matthews began, her voice steady but gentle. "Catherine, I need to discuss some findings with you that require immediate attention and further testing." Catherine felt William's hand find hers automatically, their fingers interlacing with a desperation that neither of them acknowledged aloud. The clinical language was already creating distance between her current life and whatever was coming next, and she found herself gripping William's hand as if it could anchor her to the world she had known just hours earlier. "We've found some abnormalities that indicate you may be dealing with a form of cancer," Dr. Matthews continued, watching Catherine's face carefully for her reaction. "The preliminary results suggest it's caught early, which is very encouraging, but we need to conduct additional tests to determine the exact type and stage before we can discuss treatment options." The word "cancer" seemed to echo in the quiet room, reverberating off the walls and settling into Catherine's consciousness with a weight that felt physical. She had heard this word countless times in relation to the charitable work she did, had comforted families dealing with cancer diagnoses, had visited hospitals and met brave patients fighting various forms of the disease. She had never imagined sitting in a doctor's office hearing it applied to her own body. William's grip on her hand tightened, and she could feel the tremor in his fingers that he was trying to control. When she turned to look at him, she saw her husband struggling to process information that was reshaping their future in real time. His face had gone pale, but his eyes remained focused entirely on her, as if his attention alone could somehow protect her from what they were hearing. "What kind of additional tests?" Catherine asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when her thoughts felt like they were fragmenting. Some part of her mind had shifted into practical mode, the same mental state that helped her navigate complex royal protocols or manage family crises. If this was happening, she needed to understand it completely. Dr. Matthews leaned forward slightly, her professional demeanor softened by genuine concern for a patient she had known for years. "We'll need to do a more comprehensive imaging study and a biopsy to get definitive answers. I've already spoken with Dr. Richard Harrison, who is one of the leading oncologists in London. He can see you tomorrow morning if you're available." "Tomorrow," William said, not quite a question but not quite a statement either. Catherine could hear him trying to absorb the speed with which their lives were accelerating into unfamiliar territory. "The sooner we have complete information, the sooner we can develop a treatment plan," Dr. Matthews explained. "Early detection gives us significantly more options, and, based on what I'm seeing in these preliminary results, I'm optimistic about the treatment possibilities." Catherine found herself studying Dr. Matthews' face, looking for clues about what the doctor wasn't saying directly. After years of royal life, she had become skilled at reading between the lines, at understanding the full scope of situations from careful word choices and subtle expressions. What she saw in Dr. Matthews' eyes was concern tempered by genuine hope, worry balanced by professional confidence. "How long have you suspected this?" William asked, his voice carrying an edge that Catherine recognized as carefully controlled fear. "Could this have been caught earlier?" "Based on Catherine's symptoms and the progression indicated by these tests, this is very much within normal detection timelines," Dr. Matthews assured them. "Cancer often develops without obvious early symptoms, and Catherine was right to seek medical attention when she did. There's no indication that any delay has impacted treatment options." The relief on William's face was immediate and profound. Catherine realized he had been carrying guilt about not insisting she see a doctor sooner, blame that she hadn't even known he was harboring. The idea that he might be holding himself responsible for her illness added another layer of complexity to emotions that were already overwhelming. "What do we tell the children?" Catherine asked, the question emerging from the part of her mind that was already thinking ahead to all the ways this diagnosis would ripple through their family's life. George, Charlotte, and Louis were old enough to notice changes in routine, to sense when something was wrong even if they couldn't understand what it was. "That depends partly on what we learn from the additional testing," Dr. Matthews said. "But, generally, children handle difficult news better when they receive age-appropriate information rather than sensing that something is being hidden from them. We can discuss the best approach once we have a clearer picture of the treatment plan. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering practical details about the upcoming tests, potential timelines for treatment, and the logistics of managing Catherine's care while maintaining their family's privacy. Dr. Matthews was thorough and patient, answering questions they hadn't even thought to ask and providing resources for additional information when they were ready to absorb more details. Throughout the discussion, Catherine found herself observing William as much as she listened to medical explanations. She watched him take notes with the focused attention he usually reserved for briefings about matters of state, saw him ask detailed questions about treatment success rates and side effects, noticed how he positioned his chair slightly closer to hers as the appointment progressed. He was already shifting into protective mode, already beginning to reconfigure his understanding of their life around her diagnosis. When they finally left Dr. Matthews' office, the late afternoon London air felt different against Catherine's skin. The world looked exactly the same as it had hours earlier, but she felt as though she was seeing it through altered perception, as if the diagnosis had changed not just her future but her present understanding of everything around her. The drive home was quiet again, but this silence felt different from their earlier tension-filled journey. Now they were both processing information that was too large and too complex to discuss immediately. Catherine stared out the window at familiar streets, noting details she might have overlooked before, the way afternoon light fell across a particular building, the careful arrangement of flowers in a window box, the ordinary beauty of people going about their daily lives. "We should call my father," William said as they approached the outskirts of Windsor. "And your parents. They should hear this from us before we tell the children." Catherine nodded, though the thought of multiplying the number of people who would know about her diagnosis felt overwhelming. Each conversation would make the situation more real, would expand the circle of worry and concern that she wasn't sure she was ready to manage while still processing her own feelings about what they had learned. "Tonight," she agreed. "After the children are asleep." They arrived home to find their house filled with the comfortable chaos of after-school activities. Charlotte was practicing piano in the music room, the sound of her scales drifting through the hallways. George was sprawled on the living room floor with homework spread around him like a paper explosion, and Louis was building an elaborate castle with blocks while providing detailed narration about the imaginary inhabitants. For a moment, standing in their front hallway listening to the sounds of their children's normal day, Catherine felt the surreal disconnect between the life they had left that morning and the life they were returning to with devastating news. Nothing had changed for George, Charlotte, and Louis. They were still children with homework and piano practice and elaborate imaginary worlds. But, for Catherine and William, everything was different. Maria approached them with her usual efficient warmth, ready to provide updates about the children's day and confirm evening plans. Catherine found herself studying their nanny's face, wondering how long it would be before Maria noticed changes in their family's routine, before yet another person would need to be included in the knowledge of Catherine's diagnosis. "How was your day in London?" Charlotte called from the piano bench, not pausing in her practice but clearly hoping for interesting details about their parents' mysterious afternoon appointment. "Fine, darling," Catherine replied, her voice carrying normal parental warmth despite feeling like she was speaking from a great distance. "How was school?" As their children launched into detailed accounts of their day, Catherine and William exchanged glances that carried entire conversations. How long could they maintain this normalcy? When would they need to begin preparing their children for changes in their family's life? How could they protect George, Charlotte, and Louis while also helping them understand and cope with whatever was ahead? Dinner that evening felt both precious and bittersweet. Catherine found herself memorizing details that she might have taken for granted before, the way Louis arranged his vegetables in careful patterns before eating them, Charlotte's animated description of a disagreement with her best friend, George's serious questions about a history project that was capturing his imagination. These moments felt simultaneously more important and more fragile than they had that morning. William was unusually attentive to domestic details, helping clear the table without being asked, suggesting they all watch a family movie together, lingering over bedtime routines in ways that the children noticed and enjoyed but didn't question. Catherine recognized his behavior as similar to her own. They were both trying to hold on to the normal rhythms of their family life while privately grappling with how dramatically those rhythms might need to change. After the children were finally asleep, Catherine and William found themselves back in their kitchen, the same space where the day had begun with Catherine's quiet admission that something was wrong. Now they sat with definitive answers that were both better and worse than the vague fears that had brought them to this point. "We should make those phone calls," William said, though neither of them moved toward the telephone. "In a few minutes," Catherine agreed, wanting to extend these last moments when the news was still private, still contained within their immediate family. They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts too complex to voice immediately. Catherine was trying to absorb the reality that she had cancer while simultaneously planning how to manage the impact on everyone she loved. William was struggling with his own fears while already beginning to reorganize his understanding of his role as her husband and partner. "I'm scared," Catherine said finally, the words emerging quietly but clearly in their peaceful kitchen. "So am I," William admitted, reaching across the table to take her hands in both of his. "But we're going to get through this, Catherine. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we're going to get through this together." Looking into his eyes, Catherine saw fear that matched her own, but she also saw something else that steadied her racing thoughts. She saw the absolute certainty that he meant what he was promising, that his commitment to facing this challenge with her was complete and unwavering. In that moment, despite everything they had learned that day, despite all the uncertainty that lay ahead, Catherine felt a profound sense of being supported and love that gave her courage to face whatever was coming next. The phone calls would be difficult, the conversations with their children would require careful thought and preparation, and the weeks ahead would bring medical appointments and treatment decisions that would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But, sitting in their kitchen, with William's hands warming hers and his unwavering love surrounding her like a shield against an uncertain future, Catherine felt ready to begin the fight of her life. The oncology unit at the London clinic felt different from any medical facility Catherine had ever entered. There was a particular quality to the atmosphere, a blend of hope and gravity that seemed to permeate the very walls. Patients moved through corridors with a deliberate calmness, some accompanied by family members whose faces carried the same mixture of determination and fear that Catherine recognized in William's expression as they made their way to Dr. Harrison's office. 3 days had passed since Dr. Matthews delivered the initial diagnosis, 3 days during which Catherine and William had navigated the surreal experience of maintaining their normal family routines while privately grappling with a reality that felt both urgent and unreal. They had made the necessary phone calls to family members, conversations that ranged from devastating to surprisingly strengthening, and had begun the delicate process of deciding how much to tell their children and when. Dr. Richard Harrison was a man in his late 40s with graying temples and hands that moved with the confident precision of someone who had delivered difficult news countless times while never losing sight of the human being receiving it. His office was filled with natural light and carefully chosen artwork that managed to be both sophisticated and comforting, creating an environment where life-altering conversations could unfold with appropriate gravity and hope. "The biopsy results confirm that you have a form of abdominal cancer," Dr. Harrison began, consulting notes while maintaining eye contact with Catherine. "Specifically, we're looking at what appears to be an early-stage tumor that has not spread to surrounding lymph nodes. This is very encouraging news in terms of treatment options and prognosis." Catherine felt William's hand find hers immediately, their fingers intertwining with a desperation that had become automatic over the past several days. She had prepared herself for this moment by researching various types of cancer online, trying to educate herself about possibilities and outcomes, but hearing definitive medical terminology applied to her own body still felt like a shock that reverberated through her entire system. "What does early stage mean in practical terms?" William asked, his voice carrying the controlled tone that Catherine recognized from high-stakes royal meetings. He had shifted into his problem-solving mode, the mental state that helped him navigate complex diplomatic situations or family crises that required immediate, thoughtful action. In Catherine's case, we caught this very early, which gives us excellent treatment options, Dr. Harrison explained, turning his computer screen to show them imaging results that looked like abstract art to Catherine's untrained eye. The tumor is contained and operable. We're looking at surgery followed by a course of chemotherapy to ensure we've addressed any cancer cells that might not be visible on current imaging. The word chemotherapy hung in the air between them like a bridge they weren't ready to cross. Catherine had visited cancer patients receiving chemotherapy during her charitable work, had seen the physical toll the treatment could take, had witnessed both the hope and the suffering that characterized the cancer journey. Now she was hearing it described as part of her own immediate future. How long would treatment take? Catherine asked, already thinking about her children's school schedules, upcoming royal engagements that would need to be cancelled or postponed, and the complex logistics of managing a public life while dealing with private medical challenges. Surgery can be scheduled for next week if you're ready to move forward, Dr. Harrison said. Recovery from the operation will take several weeks, during which time you'll need to limit physical activity significantly. The chemotherapy course would begin approximately 4 weeks after surgery and continue for about 4 months, with treatments every 3 weeks. 4 months. Catherine tried to process what 4 months of chemotherapy would mean for her family, for her role as a mother, for her royal duties and charitable commitments. 4 months that would take them from late winter through spring and into early summer, months that would normally be filled with school activities, family holidays, and the kinds of ordinary experiences that she suddenly realized she might not be able to participate in normally. What are the side effects we should expect? William asked, and Catherine could hear him already beginning to plan, already thinking through how to reorganize their lives around her treatment schedule. Dr. Harrison's expression grew more serious, acknowledging that effective cancer treatment inevitably came with challenging trade-offs. Chemotherapy affects people differently, but common side effects include fatigue, nausea, hair loss, increased susceptibility to infections, and changes in appetite and taste. We have excellent supportive medications now that can minimize many of these effects, but Catherine will need significant rest and care during treatment. Hair loss. Catherine's hand moved unconsciously to touch her own hair, the long brown waves that had become part of her public image, that her children loved to braid and play with, that William wound around his fingers during quiet moments together. The thought of losing her hair felt both trivial compared to fighting cancer and devastatingly significant in ways she couldn't fully articulate. The important thing to remember, Dr. Harrison continued, is that the type of cancer Catherine has responds very well to this treatment protocol. The 5-year survival rate for early-stage cases like hers is over 95%. We're not just treating this cancer, we're working toward a complete cure. 95%. The number should have been reassuring, but Catherine found herself fixating on the 5% that remained uncertain. Statistics felt both comforting and meaningless when applied to her own life, her own future, her own children who needed their mother to be healthy and present. When would we need to make a decision about surgery? Catherine asked, recognizing that gathering more information was her way of feeling some control over a situation that threatened to overwhelm her completely. Ideally, we'd schedule surgery for early next week, Dr. Harrison replied. With cancer, timing is always important, and waiting longer than necessary isn't advisable. However, I understand that you have unique circumstances to consider in terms of managing public responsibilities and family logistics. Unique circumstances. Catherine appreciated Dr. Harrison's diplomatic way of acknowledging that her cancer diagnosis would inevitably become public knowledge, that her treatment would be scrutinized by media and public in ways that ordinary patients never experienced. The privacy that most families took for granted during medical crises would not be available to them, adding layers of complexity to decisions that were already overwhelming. The rest of the appointment covered practical details about the surgery itself, post-operative care requirements, and the logistics of beginning chemotherapy treatment. Dr. Harrison was thorough and patient, explaining medical procedures in language they could understand while acknowledging the emotional weight of everything they were discussing. Catherine found herself taking notes with the same focused attention she usually reserved for briefings about charitable initiatives, trying to organize information that felt too large and too frightening to fully absorb. When they finally left Dr. Harrison's office, Catherine felt as though they had crossed an invisible line from uncertainty into a very specific kind of certainty. They knew what she was facing, they knew what treatment would involve, and they knew that the next several months would test their family in ways they had never anticipated. The weight of definitive information was both heavier and lighter than the speculation and worry that had characterized the past several days. The drive home was quiet, both of them lost in thoughts too complex and too personal to share immediately. Catherine stared out the window at London streets that looked exactly the same as they had hours earlier, marveling at how the ordinary world continued its normal pace while her own world had shifted dramatically once again. "We need to tell the children tonight," William said as they approached Windsor, his voice carrying a resolution that Catherine recognized as his way of moving from processing difficult information to taking necessary action. Yes, Catherine agreed, though the thought of explaining cancer and chemotherapy to George, Charlotte, and Louis felt overwhelming in ways that facing her own diagnosis somehow hadn't. "How do we even begin that conversation?" "Together," William said simply, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "We begin it together, and we'll figure out the words as we go." They arrived home to find their house filled with the usual after-school energy. Charlotte was in the garden with their dog, teaching him elaborate tricks that he was tolerating with patient good humor. George was in his room, supposedly doing homework but actually reading adventure novels that he tried to hide when adults approached. Louis was in the kitchen with Maria, creating what he described as important artistic work with finger paints and what Maria privately characterized as controlled chaos. For a few moments, Catherine stood in their front hallway listening to the sounds of her children's normal day and felt the familiar disconnect between the devastating news she was carrying and the beautiful ordinariness of family life continuing around her. How could she be planning to tell George, Charlotte, and Louis about surgery and chemotherapy when they were concerned with dog tricks and homework and finger painting? "Mummy, Daddy, look what I taught Oscar." Charlotte called from the garden, her voice carrying the pure excitement of a child who had achieved something wonderful and wanted to share it with the people she loved most. Catherine and William went outside to watch their daughter demonstrate the new tricks she had taught their golden retriever, both of them trying to match Charlotte's enthusiasm while privately carrying the weight of the conversation they would need to have after dinner. Oscar performed his new skills with the patient dignity that made him such a perfect family dog, sitting and staying and rolling over with elaborate precision while Charlotte praised his intelligence and dedication. "That's wonderful, darling," Catherine said, meaning it completely despite the emotional complexity of the moment. "Oscar is very lucky to have such a patient teacher." As they moved through the familiar rhythms of late afternoon and dinner preparation, Catherine found herself memorizing details she might have overlooked before her diagnosis. The way Louis narrated his finger painting process with serious concentration, describing color choices and artistic decisions with the gravity of a professional artist. George's excitement about a science project that was capturing his imagination, his detailed questions about how different materials might react under various conditions. Charlotte's animated account of a playground disagreement that had been resolved through negotiations that impressed her with their fairness and creativity. These were the moments that made her want to fight, Catherine realized. Not abstract concepts about survival statistics or 5-year prognosis rates, but the specific, irreplaceable experiences of watching her children discover their own capabilities and interests, of being present for the small daily victories and challenges that shaped their understanding of themselves and their world. Dinner conversation flowed around topics that felt both incredibly important and beautifully ordinary. George was excited about an upcoming school trip to a historical site that connected to his current fascination with medieval history. Charlotte had been selected for her school's choir performance and was nervous about singing in front of an audience. Louis had discovered that he could make different sounds by humming while eating different foods, a discovery that was both scientifically interesting and potentially problematic for table manners. William was more attentive than usual to domestic details, helping with cleanup without being asked and suggesting they all watch a family movie together after homework was finished. Catherine recognized his behavior as similar to her own impulse to hold on to normal family routines while they could, to create positive memories before their lives became more complicated by medical appointments and treatment schedules. After the children were finally settled for the evening, homework completed and bedtime stories read, Catherine and William found themselves facing the conversation they had been dreading since leaving Dr. Harrison's office. They decided to gather George, Charlotte, and Louis in the living room, a space that felt both formal enough for serious conversation and comfortable enough to provide security during difficult discussions. "We need to talk to you about something important," William began, his voice gentle but serious enough that all three children immediately gave him their complete attention. "Mummy has been feeling unwell lately, and we went to see doctors to find out what was wrong." Catherine watched her children's faces as William spoke, seeing concern beginning to replace their normal evening relaxation. George, at 10, was old enough to sense that this conversation was leading somewhere significant. Charlotte looked worried but curious, while 5-year-old Louis seemed mainly confused about why bedtime routine had been interrupted for what sounded like medical discussion. "The doctors found out that Mummy has something called cancer," Catherine said, taking over the explanation with words she had practiced in her mind throughout the afternoon. "It's a sickness that makes some of the cells in my body grow in ways they shouldn't, but the good news is that the doctors caught it early and they know exactly how to help me get better." The word cancer seemed to echo in their comfortable living room the same way it had echoed in Dr. Harrison's office, but this time Catherine was watching her children process information that would fundamentally change their understanding of their family's immediate future. George's expression became very serious, and she could see him trying to remember everything he might have heard about cancer from school health classes or conversations with friends. Charlotte looked frightened but was clearly trying to be brave, while Louis seemed mainly confused about why this conversation was making everyone look so worried. "Are you going to die?" George asked directly, his voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone he used when he needed to understand something completely rather than being protected from difficult realities. "No, sweetheart," Catherine said firmly, reaching over to take his hand. "The doctors are very confident that their treatment will make me completely better. But the treatment will take several months, and during that time I might not feel well sometimes and I might not be able to do all the things I usually do with you." The conversation continued for almost an hour, with questions ranging from practical concerns about how cancer treatment would affect their daily routines to deeper worries about whether Catherine would still be able to hug them during chemotherapy. William and Catherine answered every question as honestly as they could while providing age-appropriate information and constant reassurance about the strong likelihood of complete recovery. Charlotte wanted to know if her mother's hair would fall out during chemotherapy and whether it would grow back the same color. Louis was concerned about whether cancer was contagious and if he might have caused it by occasionally forgetting to wash his hands before dinner. George asked detailed questions about surgery procedures and recovery timelines that reminded Catherine of William's approach to processing difficult information through comprehensive understanding. By the time the conversation concluded, all three children seemed to have absorbed the basic facts about Catherine's diagnosis and treatment plan without being overwhelmed by fear or uncertainty. They were worried, clearly, but they were also reassured by their parents' calm confidence and detailed answers to their questions. "We're going to get through this together as a family," William said as they prepared to return to normal bedtime routines. "Mummy is going to get excellent medical care, and we're all going to take good care of each other while she gets better." As Catherine tucked each child into bed that night, she found herself having individual conversations that revealed how differently George, Charlotte, and Louis were processing the news about her cancer. George wanted additional reassurance about medical statistics and treatment success rates. Charlotte needed to know that expressing worry and sadness about the situation was acceptable and helpful. Louis required extra hugs and confirmation that family routines would continue as normally as possible during treatment. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Catherine and William sat together in their bedroom discussing the surgery scheduled for the following week and the longer-term adjustments their family would need to make during chemotherapy treatment. The conversation was both practical and emotional, covering everything from work schedule modifications to strategies for helping their children cope with the changes ahead. "You're going to get through this," William said as they prepared for sleep, pulling Catherine close with the fierce tenderness that had become characteristic of their interactions since her diagnosis. "We're going to get through this, and, when it's over, our family is going to be stronger than ever." Looking into his eyes, Catherine saw her own determination reflected back at her, along with a love that felt strong enough to carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring more medical appointments and treatment preparations, but tonight they were together, surrounded by their sleeping children, facing an uncertain future with absolute certainty about their love for each other and their commitment to overcoming whatever obstacles were ahead. The infusion center at the London clinic had become unexpectedly familiar territory over the past 4 months. Catherine knew which chairs were most comfortable for long chemotherapy sessions, which nurses had the gentlest touch with 4 insertions, and exactly how the late morning light fell across the windows during the hours when her treatment was typically administered. What had initially felt like foreign, frightening territory had gradually transformed into a place where she was fighting for her life with the support of medical professionals who had become trusted allies in her recovery. Today was different, though. Today was her final chemotherapy session, the completion of a treatment protocol that had tested every aspect of her physical and emotional strength while bringing her steadily closer to the goal of being completely cancer-free. The significance of this milestone felt both enormous and quietly ordinary, like reaching the summit of a mountain climb that had required months of preparation and determination. William sat beside her in the familiar infusion chair, reading briefing papers while staying alert to any changes in how Catherine was feeling during treatment. Over the past 4 months, he had become expert at interpreting the subtle signs that indicated whether she was managing side effects well or needed additional supportive care. His presence during every single chemotherapy session had become one of the constants that helped Catherine endure treatment days that were simultaneously hopeful and exhausting. "How are you feeling about this being the last one?" asked Jennifer, the oncology nurse who had administered most of Catherine's chemotherapy treatments and had become someone Catherine genuinely looked forward to seeing despite the circumstances that brought them together. "Relieved, grateful, and a little nervous about what comes next," Catherine answered honestly, watching the clear medication drip slowly through the 4-line that connected her to recovery. "It's strange to think that after today, we'll be moving into a different phase where the focus shifts from active treatment to monitoring and recovery." The past 4 months had been simultaneously the most difficult and most revealing period of Catherine's adult life. Chemotherapy had brought side effects that challenged her in ways she hadn't fully anticipated, despite comprehensive preparation from her medical team. The fatigue had been deeper and longer-lasting than anything she had experienced, even during the demanding early weeks of motherhood when sleep deprivation seemed like a permanent condition. Hair loss had begun 3 weeks after her first treatment, starting gradually and, then, accelerating until she made the decision to shave off the remaining strands rather than watching them fall out unpredictably. William had helped her with this process, both of them crying quietly as he carefully removed hair that had been part of her identity for her entire adult life. The children had handled her dramatically changed appearance better than she had expected, with Charlotte immediately suggesting they shop for beautiful scarves and Louis declaring that bald mummy gave the best hugs because there was no hair to get in the way. Nausea had been manageable with excellent anti-nausea medications, but appetite changes had affected her relationship with food in ways that lingered even on good days. Favorite meals became unappetizing, while foods she had never particularly enjoyed suddenly seemed appealing. The children had adapted to these changes by becoming adventurous cooks themselves, experimenting with recipes they thought might interest their mother and celebrating small victories when something tasted good to her during difficult treatment weeks. The impact on their family's daily routines had been significant but not overwhelming, largely due to William's determination to maintain as much normalcy as possible while accommodating Catherine's changing needs and energy levels. He had reduced his royal duties to the absolute minimum required, delegating responsibilities whenever possible and declining events that would take him away from home for extended periods. Their children's activities had continued with additional support from grandparents and family friends who stepped in to provide transportation and encouragement when Catherine wasn't feeling well enough to attend school performances or sporting events. "The children have been amazing through all of this," Catherine told Jennifer as the final chemotherapy treatment neared completion. "They've been worried about me, obviously, but they've also been so helpful and understanding about all the ways our normal family life has had to change temporarily." George had become intensely interested in medical science, reading everything he could find about cancer treatment and asking sophisticated questions that impressed Dr. Harrison during Catherine's follow-up appointments. Charlotte had channeled her concern into creative projects, making elaborate artwork and writing detailed stories about brave princesses who overcame various challenges through determination and family support. Louis had appointed himself the family's chief source of entertainment, developing elaborate games and performances designed specifically to make his mother laugh during days when she wasn't feeling well. "Family support makes such a difference in treatment outcomes," Jennifer observed, checking Catherine's vital signs and noting that all indicators remained stable throughout this final session. "Your children are going to remember how the family pulled together during this difficult time, and it's going to make them stronger and more resilient people." The broader royal family had also rallied around Catherine and William in ways that had surprised and moved them both. King Charles had quietly reorganized his own schedule to provide additional support for royal duties that William couldn't manage while focusing on Catherine's care. Catherine's parents had become regular presences in their home, helping with childcare and household management without making Catherine feel like a burden or invalid. The wider network of royal staff had seamlessly adjusted to accommodate medical appointments and treatment schedules while maintaining the privacy that allowed Catherine to focus on recovery rather than public scrutiny. "Dr. Harrison wants to see you next week for follow-up scans and blood work," Jennifer said as she began the process of disconnecting Catherine from the equipment that had been part of her life for 4 months. "If everything looks good, which we expect it will, you'll transition to monitoring appointments every 3 months for the first year, then every 6 months for several years after that." The prospect of returning to normal life felt both exciting and daunting. Catherine was eager to have her energy return, to watch her hair grow back, to resume the royal duties and charitable work that gave her life meaning and purpose beyond her family. But she was also aware that the experience of facing cancer had changed her in ways that she was still discovering, had shifted her priorities and deepened her appreciation for aspects of life that she had previously taken for granted. "I think I'm going to miss some parts of this experience," Catherine admitted to William as they left the infusion center for the final time, walking through corridors that had become as familiar as their own home during months of regular treatment. "What parts?" William asked, genuinely curious about her perspective on an experience that had been overwhelmingly difficult and stressful for their entire family. "The way everything else became less important," Catherine explained, trying to articulate feelings that were complex and still evolving. "For 4 months, the only thing that really mattered was getting better and taking care of our family. All the other pressures and expectations and obligations just fell away, and I remembered what's actually essential in our lives." The drive home took them through London streets that were busy with late spring activity, people going about their normal daily business while Catherine completed the most significant medical milestone of her life. The contrast between the momentous nature of finishing chemotherapy and the ordinary world continuing around them felt both surreal and comforting. Life had continued during her cancer treatment, and now she was ready to rejoin it with a deeper appreciation for both its challenges and its joys. "How do you want to celebrate tonight?" William asked as they approached Windsor, already thinking ahead to marking this milestone in a way that acknowledged its significance without overwhelming their children, who were still adjusting to the gradual improvements in Catherine's health and energy levels. Family dinner, maybe a special dessert, and early bedtime for everyone, Catherine replied, realizing that her vision of celebration had changed dramatically over the past 4 months. I want normal family time where we can all relax together without any medical appointments or treatment schedules to think about. That evening's celebration was indeed wonderfully ordinary. Catherine felt well enough to help prepare dinner, the first time in weeks that she had been able to participate actively in cooking rather than just offering suggestions from a comfortable chair in the kitchen. The children were excited about her increased energy and involvement, chattering about school projects and summer plans while setting the table with extra care because this was a special family occasion. "Are you all better now, Mummy?" Louis asked during dinner, voicing the question that all 3 children had been thinking about as Catherine's treatment neared completion. "The doctors think all the cancer is gone," Catherine explained, choosing words carefully to be both honest and age-appropriate. "Now we're moving into a time when I'll get stronger every week, and we'll have regular checkups to make sure I stay healthy. The hardest part is over, and I'm going to keep getting better. Does this mean you can play football with me in the garden again?" Louis asked hopefully, clearly having given considerable thought to the activities he missed most during his mother's treatment. "Very soon," Catherine promised, ruffling his hair with a gesture that felt both familiar and precious after months when physical affection had to be carefully managed due to her compromised immune system. "Maybe not tomorrow, but very, very soon." The weeks following Catherine's final chemotherapy treatment brought gradual but noticeable improvements in her energy levels, appetite, and overall sense of well-being. Her hair began growing back in soft waves that were slightly different in texture from her pre-treatment hair, a change that she found both strange and exciting as visible evidence of her body's remarkable ability to heal and recover. Royal duties resumed gradually, with careful attention to building up Catherine's stamina for public appearances and charitable work that required sustained energy and concentration. Her first official engagement after completing treatment was a visit to a children's cancer ward, an event that had been scheduled before her diagnosis but took on profound personal significance after her own cancer experience. Meeting young patients who were in various stages of cancer treatment, Catherine found herself able to connect with their families in ways that her previous charitable work hadn't prepared her for. She understood intimately the fear in parents' eyes, the brave smiles that children wore when they were scared, and the complex mixture of hope and exhaustion that characterized life during cancer treatment. "The children were so inspired by your visit," wrote one mother in a thank-you note that arrived several weeks later. Knowing that someone they had seen on television had gone through similar treatment and come out healthy and strong gave them hope during a very difficult time. These connections with other cancer patients and their families became an unexpected source of meaning for Catherine as she continued her own recovery. Her experience had given her insights and empathy that enhanced her charitable work in ways she couldn't have anticipated before her diagnosis. The difficulty she had endured was becoming a source of strength and understanding that she could offer to others facing similar challenges. "You're different," William observed one evening in late summer as they sat in their garden watching their children play while dinner cooked slowly in the kitchen. "Not worse or better, just different. More settled somehow, like you know something now that you didn't know before." Catherine considered his observation, recognizing the truth in his words without being able to fully articulate what had changed about her perspective during the months of cancer treatment and recovery. "I think facing something that scared me that much and getting through it made me realize how strong we actually are," she said finally. "As individuals and as a family. There's something powerful about discovering you can handle things you never thought you'd be able to survive." The scans and blood work from her 3-month follow-up appointment brought the news they had all been hoping for but hadn't quite allowed themselves to expect with complete confidence. No evidence of cancer remained in Catherine's system. Her recovery was progressing exactly as Dr. Harrison had predicted, and her prognosis for long-term health was excellent. "We're not just talking about remission," Dr. Harrison explained during their celebration appointment that included the entire family. Based on the type of cancer Catherine had, the stage at which it was caught, and her response to treatment, we're talking about a cure. She's going to be completely healthy for many, many years to come. George, Charlotte, and Louis received this news with the kind of pure joy that children express when the adults they love most confirm that their world is safe and secure again. They had handled their mother's illness with remarkable maturity and resilience, but they were still children who needed the reassurance that came from knowing their family was whole and healthy and ready to resume the adventures and experiences that made childhood magical. Does this mean we can plan the holiday to Scotland that we talked about? Charlotte asked, referring to a family trip that had been postponed during Catherine's treatment but had remained a dream they all shared. It means we can plan anything we want, William said, pulling all three children into a group hug that included Catherine and felt like the completion of a journey that had tested everything they thought they knew about love, strength, and what it meant to face life's greatest challenges together. That evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet with the peaceful exhaustion that follows genuinely happy celebrations, Catherine and William found themselves back in their kitchen where this entire experience had begun with her quiet admission that something was wrong. "We did it," William said simply, taking her hands in the same gesture that had provided comfort and connection throughout months of medical appointments, treatment sessions, and recovery milestones. "You did it. You fought cancer and won, and our family is stronger than it's ever been." Looking into his eyes, Catherine saw reflected back to her the same love that had sustained them through every difficult moment of the past year, but she also saw something new. There was a depth of mutual respect and admiration that came from witnessing each other handle unprecedented challenges with grace and determination. They had discovered what their love looked like when tested by life's most serious threats, and it had proven to be even stronger than they had dared to hope. "I love you more than ever," Catherine said, meaning it completely and knowing that William understood she wasn't just talking about romantic feelings but about the profound partnership they had forged through facing cancer together. "And I love our life, our children, and our future in ways I couldn't even imagine before all this happened." "So do I," William replied, holding her close in their kitchen where ordinary family life continued around them, where their children would wake up tomorrow to a world where their mother was healthy and strong, where love had proven itself capable of conquering even their greatest fears. The cancer experience was over, but its lessons would remain with them forever. They had learned that true love reveals itself not in perfect moments but in imperfect ones where choosing each other becomes a daily decision. They had discovered that families grow stronger not by avoiding difficulties but by facing them together with honesty, support, and unwavering commitment to each other's well-being. Most importantly, they had proven to themselves and their children that even the most frightening challenges could be overcome when met with courage, excellent medical care, family support, and a love that was genuinely stronger than any obstacle life could place in their path. Their story was no longer about fighting cancer. It had become a story about emerging from that fight as better versions of themselves, ready to embrace whatever adventures and experiences lay ahead with gratitude, wisdom, and an unshakable confidence in their ability to handle anything together.